Good morning and welcome to Ask Andy. This is a daily podcast about personal injury practice in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm Andrew Neuwirth. So I wanted to talk to you today briefly about what not to do. And I think the most important thing is that you talk to a lawyer before you make decisions about your slip and fall, your car accident case, whatever you want to, consider in your injury situation. So I had a client recently. I started off with a client, and she was in a car accident. She had a history of prior back accidents or back injuries. And so it was going to be a tough little fight along the way. She had some back pain. She got an injection or two, which meant that her case had some, more serious value than just a little lower back pain that went away after a month. So what happened? Well, what happened was that before she came to me, she had been contacted by the insurance company for the driver who injured her and was basically tricked into signing something called a general release, which gave up her right to sue about anything in exchange for $500, which was basically the cost of repairs to the car or the deductible or something. So what's the quick takeaway? Don't sign anything called a general release. In fact, you really shouldn't sign anything giving up your rights without talking to a lawyer or reading it really, really closely. But it's hard for most people to read legal documents because, one, there's a lot of mumbo-jumbo in it. Two, the insurance company is telling you that you should sign it. And, three, the language in a release is, well, it's explicit to lawyers. It's not really, how we talk in normal everyday life. So, the release language says, I give up my rights to forever pursue any ill effects from here till its end of time. Okay, it doesn't really say you can no longer sue in a personal injury lawsuit. It just doesn't say that. And it's written that way to confuse you and to, harm you. That's why the insurance company is doing this, because they're trying to cover their ass or protect themselves, not you. So anyway, look, I had to have a hard conversation with this client and said, look, I can't represent you anymore because there's nothing to represent you on. You gave up your rights to pursue a case that's worth $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 or more, basically by being tricked into it by an insurance company claim rep who is not your lawyer and is not your friend. Now, is there a way around that? Yeah, yes and no, not really. Certainly not in Pennsylvania. But is it unfortunate? Yeah. Is it nice? No. But that's what happened. So, look, in those release situations, there's not a lot we can do. What else? It's just something to be aware of. Let's say you go back in the day before pandemic, let's say you went to a gym and you signed a release giving up your right to sue them in case you were injured at the gym. And then a gym employee drops a 45-pound weight and breaks your foot. Can you sue them? No, probably not, because, you gave up your rights to sue. That's called a waiver. You sign a lot of waivers when you go to get air with your kids, or you go ride in a charity bike ride. You get injured by a pothole. Can you sue the city of Philadelphia? Not necessarily. So, that's a waiver, but it's the same sort of release, giving up your rights to sue. So what do? Well, look, if you give up your right to sue, you give up your right to sue. You got to know what you're doing. If you release liability in a charity bike ride, are you bound by that? Well, there's actually a case going through the system, the court systems over the past few years where, an unfortunate man was in I think the Philadelphia, charity bike ride around Philadelphia. And what happened? He signed the release. What happened after that? He was in the middle of a group of riders, rode into a pothole, fell, and ended up dying. I'm not sure the exact circumstances, but he ended up dying from a head injury or something that happened during the bike ride. And then his family wanted to hold the city responsible and or hold the company that was organizing the bike ride accountable, and they had a release saying he can't. So that's been working its way through, and I think the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on it. Was the last sort of news I saw about it. But anyway, look, if you're signing legal documents, you need to be careful about what you're signing. And a lot of times legal documents are not clear about what you're signing, and that's not, sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. But the bottom line is, look, I couldn't help this one lady because she hadn't reached out before signing this document. And that kind of sucked. It sucked for her. I felt bad for her. She was angry at the insurance company because she felt like she'd been misled. Is that a way around the contract? In some contracts it is, but in most of the time, if you agree to a settlement in Pennsylvania, even verbally, that is binding and means you can't go back on it. And she agreed to a settlement, even if it was, misvalued. How was she supposed to know what the case was worth? You know what? You're supposed to go to a lawyer. That's what happened. Like if you sell like a Picasso painting for $100 and then someone turns around and sells it for $10 million, can you go back to them and say, hey, I didn't know it was worth $10 million? No, you can't. That's sort of, professional knowledge. That's what you go to professionals for, is their judgment and their experience. So anyway, look, bottom line is don't sign legal documents without talking to a lawyer. You're always welcome to reach out to me for my quick opinion on things, as long as you understand. I'm going to write you a long kind of lawyer letter saying, look, this is all I know about is what you're telling me. So that's enough for today. This podcast is sponsored by my law firm, Neuwirth Law Office. I'm a King of Prussia, suburban Philadelphia personal injury lawyer. I handle plaintiffs and injured people only, and I hold people accountable. Take care. Have a great day. Good luck in pandemic times.